Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Today we're diving into the storylines that sadly never made it to the big screen. They stayed hidden in the pages of the books, emotional, dramatic, meaningful. And without them, the picture isn't quite complete. Fasten your cloaks, we're heading into the what-if universe of Harry Potter. Number 1, the Marauders. 4 names, 1 secret. When you first saw the Marauders map, you might have asked yourself, well, who are all these people with nicknames? The films never explained, but this story? It's the soul of the past, 4 best friends. And 3 of them became animagi, not for fun, but out of loyalty, so they could stay by Lupin's side on the nights he turned into a werewolf, so he wouldn't be alone. The movies skipped this powerful story of friendship, sacrifice and unwavering loyalty. And yet, it would have told us so much more about Harry, the son of a marauder. Number 2, Hermione and the fight for those without a voice. Hermione was never just the brightest witch of her age. She always had a deep sense of justice, one that went far beyond school rules. When she learned how house elves were treated, she couldn't stay silent. That's how the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare was born in the movies. Not a word, not a scene. Yet this subplot showed Hermione not just as clever, but as deeply moral, a person willing to fight for the voiceless, even when no one else cared. Number 3, Rita Skeeter, the bug with a quill. Rita Skeeter, the nosy journalist who always knew too much. How? Only book readers know the answer. Turns out Rita was an unregistered animagus. She could turn into a beetle and spy on anyone, anytime. And only Hermione figured it out. When Hermione caught her in a jar and gave her an ultimatum, "Stop writing lies, or I turn you into the ministry." It was one of Hermione's strongest moments, not just a know-it-all, but a true strategist and defender of truth. Number 4, Voldemort's origin, more than a horror story. The films barely scratched the surface of who Tom Riddle was before he became Voldemort. And that's a shame. From the Half-Blood Prince book, we learn he was born into a family wrecked by magic, lies, and tragedy. His mother, Merop Gaunt, used a love potion to win Tom's father. The result? A child who never knew real love. These details matter. They explain why Voldemort couldn't love, why he feared death, why he tore his soul apart. It's not an excuse, it's understanding, and that understanding helped Harry and us see what it truly takes to fight darkness. Number 5, Tonks and Lupin, love through fear. The films gave us a brief moment, Tonks and Lupin holding hands. But how did they get there? Why was Lupin so hesitant? Why did their love feel complicated? The books tell the full story. Lupin saw himself as a monster, unworthy of love. He tried to walk away from Tonks, from their baby, from responsibility. Not out of fear of Voldemort, but out of fear that he'd be a burden. Harry didn't see a hero. He saw a man afraid of happiness. And in one of the most powerful conversations, the student stood up to the teacher. It was raw, it was real, and it was left out of the movies. Maybe because the films didn't want to show us the weaknesses of those we admire. Number 6, the Dursleys' farewell and Dudley's redemption. On the morning Harry was to leave Privet Drive forever, something unexpected happened. Dudley Dursley stood awkwardly by the car, fidgeting. He looked at Harry, not with hatred, not with fear, but with something else. "I don't think you're a waste of space," he said. Simple words. But for Dudley, they meant everything. For years he had bullied Harry, mocked him, feared him. But now, in the shadow of war, he saw Harry for what he was, a protector, a cousin who had once saved his life from Dementors. Harry was stunned. He had never expected anything from Dudley, not kindness, not gratitude, yet here it was, unspoken, clumsy, real. In that moment, the mask cracked. The Dursleys weren't just villains, they were people, flawed, blind, shaped by fear. But even they could grow, could learn, could feel. The films cut this scene. We never saw Dudley reach out, never saw the quiet weight of that farewell. But in the books, it mattered, because not every redemption is loud. Some come in whispers, and sometimes that's enough. Number 7, the fate of Neville Longbottom's parents. Neville Longbottom walked the halls of St. Mungo's in silence, past the flickering torches, past the coughing, muttering, shuffling patients, and into the ward where his parents sat. Frank and Alice Longbottom, heroes of the First War, now lost in their minds, tortured into madness by Bellatrix Lestrange, Rodolphus, Rabastan, and Barty Crouch Jr., not killed, destroyed. They didn't recognize their son, didn't speak. But Alice once handed Neville a gum wrapper. He kept it, folded it into his pocket like treasure. He didn't cry. He simply whispered, "Thank you." The films never showed this, never gave us the boy who stood quietly beside two broken war heroes, who faced their pain every Christmas, who didn't get answers, only silence. And still, he fought. When you know what Neville has endured, his courage in Deathly Hallows is no surprise. He led Dumbledore's army. He defied Voldemort to his face. He drew the sword of Gryffindor. The books let us see it. Bravery isn't always loud. Sometimes it stands quietly in a hospital room, holding a gum wrapper. Number 8. The Prophecy and Neville's Possible Destiny. The prophecy didn't name Harry Potter, not at first. It said, "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies." Two boys fit, Harry and Neville Longbottom, both born in July, both to parents who fought Voldemort. But Voldemort chose Harry, and in that moment he created his enemy. That single decision changed everything. Had he gone after the Longbottoms instead, Neville might have been the one marked by lightning, the one raised in a cupboard or hunted through the years. Harry might have stayed with his parents. Sirius Black might never have gone to Azkaban. The entire story would shift, and all because of a madman's fear. He chose the boy he thought most likely to be a threat, Dumbledore tells Harry, and in doing so, he made you the one. Neville never knew how close he had come to being the chosen one, but the weight of that near destiny lingers in the books. He walks the halls of Hogwarts quiet and unsure, carrying his own scars. His parents, Frank and Alice, tortured into madness by Bellatrix Lestrange. He visits them at St. Mungo's. They hand him candy wrappers. He says thank you. He keeps them all. Neville fights, not because he's chosen, but because he chooses. The films never spoke of this. Neville's quiet strength was there, but not the fragile thread of fate that tied him to Harry's story. That missing truth robbed viewers of a powerful theme, that destiny isn't written in stone, it turns on choices, and sometimes the line between hero and bystander is drawn by another's fear. Or in this case, a single wand pointed at the wrong crib. Number 9. Percy Weasley's Betrayal and Return. Percy Weasley walked into the room of requirement with dust on his cloak and shame in his eyes. He had been gone for years, gone not in distance but in silence. He had chosen the ministry over truth, chosen ambition over family. When the Order warned that Voldemort had returned, Percy called it nonsense. He walked out on Arthur, ignored Molly's letters. He wasn't there for birthdays, for Bill's wedding, for Fred and George's jokes. He wasn't there for the war, until now. He didn't say much at first. He simply stood beside Fred, shoulder to shoulder. Fred looked at him, half in disbelief. Then he laughed. "Did I hear that right? Percy actually made a joke?" That was all it took. Years of anger, of pain, melted in a heartbeat. They fought together, spells flashing, brothers once more. Percy shouted, "Let's finish this together." And in that moment, he was a Weasley again. Not the outsider, not the ministry man, just a brother. Then the world cracked, the corridor shook. Fred smiled, still smiling, when the wall exploded. He died with laughter on his lips, and Percy fell to his knees beside him, screaming, shaking, holding his twin in battle, too late to protect, too late to make more memories. It was grief without barriers, a scream that pierced the castle, the price of pride, the weight of coming home too late. The films never showed it. Percy returned in silence, with no story, no arc, no heartbreak. But the books gave him what he earned, a fall, a reckoning, and a final stand beside his family. It was a lesson. That pride can divide, but love forgives, even when it hurts. even when it ends with one last joke and the silence that follows. Number 10, Peter Pettigrew's debt to Harry. The dungeon was cold, the chains heavy, Harry and Ron stood cornered. And then came the rat, Peter Pettigrew, once their friend's betrayer, now Voldemort's trembling servant. He raised his wand, ready to end what he thought was weakness. But then he hesitated, just for a second, just enough to change everything. Harry had once spared his life, back in the shrieking shack. And Peter remembered. It wasn't mercy he offered now, it was confusion, conflict. Something cracked inside him. "You owe me, Wormtail," Harry said. And for a flicker of time, Pettigrew's hand dropped. That moment of humanity, that pause, it was enough. The hand Voldemort had given him, a magical silver instrument of cruelty, sensed the hesitation, the betrayal. It turned on its master, wrapped around his throat, and killed him. In Deathly Hallows, the line is quick but brutal. The silver hand closed suddenly around Peter's own throat. Life left him. No one else touched him, no spell was cast. It was Voldemort's gift, punishing weakness. That's how Pettigrew died, not as a villain or a hero, but something in between. A man torn by cowardice and the weight of one spared life. It was a strange, perfect kind of justice. The films cut this scene entirely. In the movie, Pettigrew simply disappears, no reckoning, no consequence. But in the book, his death echoed with meaning. It reminded us that magic remembers, that debts are real, and that even the smallest act of mercy can change the end of a life. Number 11. The Tragedy of Ariana Dumbledore. In The Deathly Hallows, the truth about Ariana Dumbledore slips into the story like a quiet shadow. She was Albus's younger sister, a delicate girl attacked by Muggle boys when she was just 6 years old. The trauma shattered her magic. It turned inward, wild and uncontrollable. It exploded out of her when she couldn't control it, Aberforth once said, and sometimes she couldn't. After their mother, Kendra, died in one of Ariana's magical outbursts, Albus came home from Hogwarts to care for the family. But he was hungry for knowledge, for power, for change. That's when he met Gellert Grindelwald. The two dreamed of revolution, of a new world order. "For the greater good," they said. But Aberforth didn't trust Grindelwald. He didn't like the way Ariana was ignored in their grand plans. The argument exploded into a duel. 3 wands, 1 stray curse. Ariana fell. No one ever knew whose spell had struck her. That death broke something in Albus Dumbledore. He never sought power again. He refused the position of Minister for Magic. He hid from leadership. "I was afraid of it," he admitted to Harry years later. "I had proven as a very young man that power was my weakness and my temptation." That admission revealed more than any spell or prophecy ever could. It showed a man haunted not by dark magic, but by guilt, grief, and the unbearable weight of what he had lost. In the films, Ariana's story is barely mentioned, but in the books it's the silent thread that explains everything. Why Dumbledore hesitated, why he placed so much faith in Harry, why he feared the Deathly Hallows even as he chased them. His sister's death was not just a family tragedy, it was the moment that shaped the man behind the myth. And without it, the films gave us only half the truth. Number 12. Fleur Delacour and the Weasley family conflict. When Bill Weasley was mauled by the werewolf Fenrir Greyback in Half-Blood Prince, the attack left him permanently scarred. His face was torn, his body disfigured. Molly Weasley, desperate and heartbroken, whispered doubts aloud. "He's so handsome. Will she still want to marry him, now that he's—" She didn't finish the sentence. Her voice trailed off under the weight of a mother's fear. Fleur Delacour was in the room. She heard everything. What happened next was not a dramatic pause or a teary scene. It was fire. Fleur stepped forward, her voice sharp as a blade. "What do you mean?" she said, her French accent tinged with fury, with, "Do you think I am going to leave him because he is no longer handsome? I am good-looking enough for both of us, I think." The room fell silent. Molly stared. Fleur went on, her voice trembling with emotion. I am in love with him. I do not care how he looks. I think he is brave, and he is strong. That moment, cut from the films, defined Fleur more than any ball gown or Vila charm ever could. She wasn't just a pretty face or a foreign beauty. She was fierce, loyal, and deeply in love. It was the turning point that melted Molly's suspicion. For the first time, she saw Fleur not as a vain outsider, but as a future daughter. Molly embraced her, offering Aunt Muriel's goblin-made tiara for the wedding. A gesture of full acceptance. None of this made it into the movies. Fleur remained in the background, a pretty bride with a French accent. But in the books, she fought against prejudice, not from enemies, but from the very family she wanted to join. And she won, not with magic, but with love and pride. Number 13, the full set of Trials Before the Philosopher's Stone. When the trio descended through the trapdoor beneath the enchanted harp, few could have imagined how many layers of protection lay between them and the legendary Philosopher's Stone. The film adaptation of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone offered a thrilling glimpse into their descent, but it only scratched the surface. In truth, the book reveals a more intricate tapestry of magical obstacles, each designed by a different professor, each reflecting not only magical skill but character judgment. What the film hinted at in fleeting images, the book unfolds as a true odyssey, one that tested the minds, hearts, and courage of 3 11-year-olds more profoundly than most adult witches or wizards ever experience. The first challenge was the descent itself, orchestrated by Professor Sprout. Hidden beneath the trapdoor was the Devil's Snare, a deadly plant that wrapped and suffocated anything that touched it. The irony of this first obstacle was clear. It was not brute strength, but calm understanding that could defeat it. Hermione, with her encyclopedic memory and rational mind, knew that Devil's Snare disliked heat and light. Devil's Snare, what did Professor Sprout say? It likes the dark and the damp, she recalled. Only her quick thinking and mastery of the Lumos Solem spell saved them from being crushed. It was a moment that emphasized that danger in the wizarding world could be overcome not with panic, but with knowledge. This test was not designed to stop Voldemort, who had already bypassed it with ease, but it was a testament to the kind of thinking Hogwarts fostered, a blend of intellect and instinct. The second trial, an encounter with a life-sized enchanted chess set, was brought to life by Professor McGonagall. Unlike the whimsical pieces of ordinary wizard chess, these were carved from stone and deadly serious. One had to become part of the game, to play to win, and more chillingly, to sacrifice. Ron, often perceived as the comic relief, emerged as the unexpected strategist. He chose to sit astride a knight, took command of the board, and orchestrated a victory at great personal risk. You've got to make some sacrifices. I make my move and she'll take me. That leaves you free to checkmate the king, Harry. This moment of heroism, entirely Ron's, was underplayed in the film but roared to life in the novel. The chessboard was not only a game, it was a battlefield, and Ron's sacrifice revealed the nobility often hidden behind his humour. Perhaps the most understated trial was the mountain troll. In the movie, the only troll we see is the one that nearly crushed Hermione in the girls' bathroom during Halloween. But in the book, Professor Quirrell, ironically, the very man trying to steal the stone, used another troll as one of the obstacles. By the time Harry and his friends reached the chamber, the troll was already knocked out. Its presence was a ghost of an earlier battle, one we did not witness, but which underscored the physical threat woven among the mental and magical. The absence of this trial in the film diminished the sense of cumulative peril and obscured the detail that Quirrell, while cowardly in appearance, had strength enough to handle such a beast. The implications of this went largely unnoticed, but whispered volumes about the double life Quirrell led, his outward fear and disguising dangerous capability. Next came the chamber filled with flying keys, a trap fashioned by the charms master, Professor Flitwick. The air was alive with hundreds of fluttering winged keys, each enchanted to fly at incredible speed. The only way forward was to find the one key that would fit a locked door and catch it using a broomstick. It was Harry's skill as a seeker that shone here, reminding us that his Quidditch talent was more than mere schoolyard sport. It had real-world implications. His ability to remain calm in midair, to spot the tiny silver key among hundreds, and to grasp it despite its speed, showcased the reflexes and intuition that would define him in years to come. This trial wasn't just about flying, it was about perception, precision, and knowing which battles to chase. And then came fire, or rather, the puzzle of potions. Crafted by the ever-cynical Professor Snape, this test was perhaps the most intellectually rigorous. 7 bottles were lined up on a table, with a riddle placed before them. Some bottles contained poison, others harmless wine, and only one held the potion that would allow passage forward. In contrast to the physical demands of the previous trials, this one was purely logical. Hermione, whose talents often lay in methodical analysis, immediately recognized the challenge. She scanned the riddle and applied reasoning, noting that this was a logic puzzle, not a magical one. This isn't magic, it's logic, a puzzle. A lot of the greatest wizards haven't got an ounce of logic, they'd be stuck in here forever. Her voice, filled with a mix of fear and exhilaration, marked this moment as uniquely hers. The trial was Snape's way of separating the truly perceptive from the merely powerful. In cutting this scene from the film, a key piece of Hermione's character arc was lost, the proof that her mind was as essential to their quest as Harry's courage or Ron's sacrifice. Each of these trials was a reflection of the professor who created it. Sprout's plant-based challenge reflected her earthy pragmatism and knowledge of magical flora. McGonagall's chessboard revealed her deep sense of strategy and order. Flitwick's keys echoed his whimsical brilliance in charms. Snape's riddle was a mirror of his sharp, often biting intelligence. Even Quirrell's troll, in its way, exposed the duality of cowardice and cruelty. But the most overlooked aspect of this gauntlet is the way it demanded collaboration. No single student could have passed all the trials alone. Harry could not have conjured light to escape Devil's snare, Ron lacked the reflexes for the key room, and Hermione could not have survived the chessboard or confronted the final enemy. Only together did they stand a chance. Number 14. Marietta Edgecombe's betrayal of Dumbledore's army. Of all the overlooked stories in the Harry Potter films, none is more quietly tragic and more telling than the betrayal of Dumbledore's army by Marietta Edgecombe. This event, central to the tension between Hogwarts students and the Ministry of Magic in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, revealed not only the deepening crisis at Hogwarts but also the quiet brilliance and cunning of Hermione Granger. Yet this episode was completely erased in the cinematic adaptation, leaving behind a void where character complexity and moral ambiguity could have bloomed. Marietta Edgecombe was not a well-known name among fans who watched only the films. Yet, in the pages of J.K. Rowling's 5th book, she played a pivotal role that tested the loyalty of friends, challenged the reach of authority, and highlighted the costs of rebellion. A Ravenclaw student, Marietta was the best friend of Cho Chang, the same Cho who captured the complicated affections of Harry Potter. And it was through this connection that Marietta became entwined in a secret far bigger than herself. Dumbledore's army, the student-led resistance group founded by Harry, Hermione, and Ron, operated in defiance of the oppressive rule of Dolores Umbridge, the ministry-appointed High Inquisitor. Their meetings were clandestine, held in the magically concealed Room of Requirement, where they practiced defensive spells forbidden under the new regime. Trust was sacred among the members and betrayal was unthinkable, but fear, as it so often does, proved stronger than solidarity for one. What made this story unforgettable in the book was not just the betrayal itself, but the fallout, the consequences, both magical and emotional. Marietta, driven by pressure from her mother, who worked for the ministry, secretly reported the existence of Dumbledore's army to Professor Umbridge. But she didn't anticipate the trap that had been laid. Hermione Granger, ever cautious and unnervingly clever, had enchanted the list of names signed by those who joined the DA. "It's a jinx," she explained. "If anyone betrays the group, the results will be unpleasant." It was not a vague threat. When Marietta turned informant, her face erupted in angry purple pustules, spelling the word sneak across her forehead. The effect was immediate and permanent, a physical scar of betrayal. This moment in the book was stark, graphic, and unforgettable. It painted Hermione in a new light, not only as a genius student, but as a tactician unafraid to use darkly creative magic to protect those she cared about. She was not merely clever, she was willing to act decisively, even ruthlessly, for the greater good. The jinx was not a random punishment, it was a deliberate, visible warning. Loyalty was not optional. Marietta's condition shocked even Professor Umbridge. The High Inquisitor's attempt to interrogate her failed, as Marietta refused to speak further, overwhelmed with shame and horror at what had happened. The betrayal backfired. Though she tried to serve the Ministry's cause, she was rendered useless to it, silenced by her own fear and guilt. Her story disappeared from the Hogwarts rumor mill as quickly as her confidence vanished. And yet, Cho Chang's relationship with Harry Potter suffered for it. The film simplified this to a clumsy plot device, a kiss, followed by awkward silence. But in the book, the truth was far more layered. Cho defended Marietta, torn between friendship and justice, and Harry, incensed by what he saw as a betrayal of everything they stood for, couldn't understand her stance. Their romantic hopes withered, not due to awkward teenage feelings, but because of diverging values exposed by war. Rowling painted this fracture with brutal honesty. "You're just as bad as she is," Cho snapped at Harry in the book. But Harry saw the betrayal clearly. "She's a sneak." It was not merely about a school club. It was about trust, about safety, about life and death. The stakes were higher than Cho or Marietta seemed to understand, and Harry could not afford half measures. The films, in cutting this arc, diminished the moral complexity of the resistance within Hogwarts. They robbed the story of one of its richest conflicts, not between good and evil, but between fear and courage, friendship and loyalty, and the grey lines between right and wrong. By erasing Marietta, they erased the cost of betrayal. Marietta's silence after the betrayal was deafening. She became a ghost in the corridors of Hogwarts, her face hidden, her voice absent. She was not expelled, nor was she redeemed. She simply vanished from the story, consumed by the consequences of her own fear. It was one of Rowling's most haunting illustrations of how some students broke under pressure while others rose. The magical world was not fair, and in Marietta's case, the price of weakness was marked in flesh. Hermione's curse served a dual function. It protected the group and it punished treachery, but it also raised ethical questions. Was it right to brand someone permanently, even if they betrayed a cause? Could fear ever justify betrayal? Marietta did not act out of malice. She acted out of panic, familial obligation, and coercion. Yet her punishment was as visible as it was irreversible. That moment is one of the few in the series where Hermione's moral compass seems flexible, where she is no longer simply the voice of rules and reason. In fact, she defied the very authority she once championed. It was a turning point for her, and for the narrative as a whole. As Umbridge's tyranny grew, so did the DA's resolve, and Hermione's curse was the clearest symbol of how the stakes had changed. In hindsight, Marietta was a tragic figure, caught between the Ministry and a student rebellion, between a friend and a regime. She was neither villain nor hero, but a girl who chose the wrong side at the wrong time and paid a heavy price. And unlike other minor characters who were offered redemption arcs, Marietta received none. She was a casualty of fear. Number 15, the story of Winky the House Elf. Winky's tale begins not in the grand halls of Hogwarts nor under the warmth of Dumbledore's watchful eye, but in the shadowed corners of power and obedience, where names like Crouch carried the weight of generations. Winky was not merely a house elf serving the Crouch family. She was bound by honor, loyalty, and an inherited servitude that stretched back farther than even she could remember. Her devotion was absolute. And in that absolute loyalty lay the first quiet tragedy of her life. for it would be used against her in ways neither just nor kind. When the Quidditch World Cup set the wizarding world ablaze with celebration, it was not only sport and spectacle that unfolded in the night. Amid the chaos, when the dark mark scorched the sky, panic gripped the magical community, the Ministry acted swiftly, and in its haste to restore order, justice became collateral. Winky was discovered holding a wand, Harry Potter's wand no less, abandoned in the forest during the chaos. Accused of conjuring the mark, her protestations fell on deaf ears. The truth, concealed in the locked lips of power, was far more complex. For it was not Winky who cast the dark mark, but Barty Crouch Jr., the disgraced and supposedly dead son of her master, hidden away for years under the imperious curse. Winky, bound by duty, had been caring for him in secret, attending to him with the same care she once reserved for household chores. She pleaded with her master not to take Barty Jr. to the World Cup, but her words, like her status, were considered inconsequential. She had been ordered to accompany the hidden son to the event, and so she did, terrified but obedient. When the truth threatened to emerge, Barty Crouch Sr. chose the easier betrayal. In front of ministry officials and strangers alike, he dismissed Winky on the spot. She fell to the ground, wailing and stunned, her life unraveled with a snap of fingers. "You is setting Winky free," she cried in horror. This was no liberation, it was exile. Dobby had once dreamed of freedom. But Winky, moulded in a different kind of servitude, saw freedom as shame. For her, dismissal was not an end to chains, but a mark of failure and disgrace. Stripped of her identity and forced to leave the only life she had ever known, Winky wandered into Hogwarts not as a hopeful creature starting anew, but as a broken soul seeking refuge. Dumbledore, ever the silent collector of lost and wounded beings, offered her a position in the castle kitchens. There, among other house elves, she could have found a new rhythm, a new place. But Winky had been fractured in ways not easily mended. Her sorrow turned inward, and she sank into a dark place. It was not long before the sweet scent of butterbeer, normally festive and mild, became a bitter accompaniment to her suffering. Winky began to drink, not in celebration, but in despair. She sat, often slumped and glassy-eyed, clutching tankards with trembling hands. Her once bright eyes were dull, her movements sluggish. Other elves watched with a mix of worry and judgment. But none understood the full weight she carried: shame, secrecy, grief, and a loyalty unacknowledged. She had not only lost her position, she had lost her purpose. Her descent into alcoholism was not a throwaway detail in Rowling's pages. It was a window into the psyche of a being bred to serve, discarded without dignity. Winky's heartbreak wasn't over the injustice alone, but over her inability to fulfill the role she believed defined her. She had failed the Crouches. She had failed herself. The butterbeer was her way of numbing the loss, a ritual of sorrow that only deepened her sense of powerlessness. What made Winky's story profoundly important was not just the pain she endured, but the way her arc quietly reflected the larger moral failings of the magical world. House elves were not merely side characters offering comic relief or magical support. They were a hidden class, exploited and voiceless. Through Winky, Rowling lifted the curtain on a truth long ignored, that even in a world of spells and wonders, injustice could thrive beneath the surface. Hermione Granger saw this, even when others didn't. Through her creation of SPEW, the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, Hermione became Winky's unlikely champion. She noticed the injustice, she named it, and though she was mocked for her efforts, her determination to fight for the elves gave a moral spine to the series that often went unacknowledged. "You know, house elves get a very raw deal," she once declared, and in Winky's weeping figure, that truth became undeniable. Yet Winky resisted Hermione's help. This resistance was not ingratitude, but the internalization of her own oppression. She did not want liberation. She wanted redemption. She wanted to return to the Crouch family, to serve once more, to erase the disgrace that clung to her name. Even as she trembled from the effects of her drinking, she remained adamant. She had been loyal. She had done her duty. Her pain was not rooted in a desire for freedom, but in the heartbreak of being cast aside without honor. Rowling's choice to explore these complexities through Winky was a daring act of literary nuance. While the main plot of Goblet of Fire raced with dragons and tournaments and dark returns, Winky's subplot unfolded like a whisper in the margins. But it carried with it a thunderous truth. Winky was not just a victim. She was a mirror to the contradictions of a magical society that claimed righteousness, yet turned a blind eye to systemic subjugation. By omitting Winky's story from the film adaptation, this moral layer was tragically lost. The audience missed not only a moving character arc, but also the deeper critique of magical society's complicity in inequality. The house elves in the films remained mostly invisible or caricatured, stripped of the emotional and social weight that Rowling had so carefully woven into their stories. Winky's absence meant that viewers never truly understood the stakes behind Hermione's activism or the emotional cost of house elf servitude. Number 16. The true friendship between Harry and Dobby. Of all the friendships Harry Potter formed throughout his journey, none is quite as overlooked and underappreciated as the one he shared with Dobby the house elf. In the films, Dobby appears briefly, mostly as comic relief or a device to move the plot forward, but the books reveal a far deeper and more profound connection. This was a friendship built not on convenience but on loyalty, mutual respect, and the shared experience of fighting against injustice. Dobby's first appearance in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets sets the tone for his devotion. Desperate to protect Harry from returning to Hogwarts, Dobby nearly injures him several times, sabotaging his letters and dropping a cake on a guest to ensure Harry would be punished. While these antics were chaotic, the motivation behind them was rooted in pure, selfless concern. Dobby knew of the danger the Chamber of Secrets posed and acted alone to protect the boy who, unbeknownst to Harry at the time, he already revered as a hero. The bond deepens dramatically when Harry, moved by Dobby's suffering, engineers his freedom. In one of the most symbolic gestures in the series, Harry tricks Lucius Malfoy into presenting Dobby with a sock, a token of clothing that liberates a house elf. It's not just a moment of cleverness, it's an act of compassion that changes Dobby's life. "Dobby is free," the elf says, tears of joy in his eyes. For a being who had been mistreated and abused his entire life, Harry's kindness wasn't just a gift, it was liberation, dignity, and recognition all wrapped into one. But this act of kindness doesn't go unrewarded. Unlike many magical creatures who fade into the background after their narrative function is served, Dobby becomes one of Harry's most devoted allies. In Goblet of Fire, Dobby takes a job at Hogwarts, not because he seeks comfort, but because he wants to serve in a place where he can be free and useful. Harry doesn't just give him a sock, he gives him purpose. He offers Dobby 10 galleons a week and weekends off, though Dobby insists on being paid only 1 galleon a week and 1 day off per month. That quirky negotiation reveals the blend of house elf tradition and newfound independence. Dobby isn't just adjusting to freedom, he is redefining it in his own terms, and Harry supports that. One of the most touching aspects of their friendship is how it's sustained not through major plot points, but through small, consistent acts of care. Harry gives Dobby gifts, colourful socks, which the elf treasures more than gold. Dobby, in return, doesn't just idolize Harry, he goes to extraordinary lengths to protect him. In Order of the Phoenix, it's Dobby who shows Harry the Room of Requirement, a hidden space that becomes the base for Dumbledore's army. Without that room, the student resistance might never have formed. Dobby doesn't seek recognition. He helps because he believes in Harry and the cause he represents. In Half-Blood Prince, Dobby continues to aid Harry, this time by tailing Draco Malfoy at Harry's request. His willingness to follow orders from a friend, not a master, illustrates the enormous shift in his identity. Dobby isn't just an elf anymore, he's an agent of good, acting out of his own moral compass. The transformation from servant to self-directed ally is profound. It's a quiet revolution taking place in the margins of the main narrative, and Harry is at the heart of it. The apex of Dobby's friendship, however, comes in Deathly Hallows. When Harry and his friends are captured and imprisoned in the cellar of Malfoy Manor, it is Dobby who apparates into danger to save them. The books describe how he arrives, trembling but determined, managing to rescue Luna Lovegood, Dean Thomas, Mr. Ollivander, and finally Harry and Griphook. When Bellatrix Lestrange throws a knife as they disapparate, the blade hits Dobby. In his final moments, Dobby lies in Harry's arms, whispering, "Such a beautiful place to be with friends. Dobby is happy to be with his friend Harry Potter." That scene, so heartrending in the book, loses much of its emotional weight in the films. The movie touches on the moment, but for those who haven't read the books, the full gravity of the sacrifice is hard to grasp. Dobby doesn't die just saving Harry. He dies because he chose freedom and friendship over safety and servitude. He chose Harry, and Harry, in turn, mourns him not as a creature, but as an equal. He digs Dobby's grave by hand without magic, carving the epitaph, "Here lies Dobby, a free elf." In that moment, their bond is sealed in grief and respect, more powerful than any spell. This emotional crescendo is built on years of quiet friendship. In the books, readers see how Harry treats Dobby not with pity, but with dignity. He listens to him. He gives him choices. When Hermione campaigns for house elf rights through SPEW, Harry supports it in practice through his relationship with Dobby, even if he's not as vocal about the politics. Dobby is never treated as comic relief in the books. He's a character with agency, emotion, and complexity. He's brave, loyal, and deeply moral. And through it all, Harry remains his anchor. It's also important to note that Dobby's story challenges the magical world's ingrained prejudices. House elves are largely viewed as second-class beings expected to serve wizards without question. Most wizards, even those considered good, accept this system. Dumbledore is one of the few who allows house elves to work for wages, but even he doesn't fight to change the system. Harry, through his actions, does. His relationship with Dobby is a quiet rebellion against societal norms. It's a testament to the power of individual kindness against structural injustice. There is a scene in Goblet of Fire when Harry gives Dobby a pair of socks for Christmas, one red with broomsticks, the other green with snitches. Dobby is overwhelmed with joy and declares them the best gift he's ever received. He even wears them mismatched on purpose to express his newfound freedom. That moment might seem small, but it encapsulates the emotional currency of their friendship. To Harry, socks are a kind gesture. To Dobby, they are symbols of identity and liberation. Dobby also serves as a mirror to Harry. Both are orphaned, both suffered under cruel guardians, and both find meaning in fighting for what's right. But while Harry is the chosen one, Dobby chooses to fight, not because prophecy demands it, but because his heart compels him. His bravery is perhaps more impressive for that reason. He isn't destined to save the world. He's just trying to do the right thing. In this way, Dobby's heroism is quiet but profound. Their friendship is also a study in trust. Dobby doesn't always make things easy. His attempt to protect Harry in the second year nearly gets Harry expelled. But over time, trust is built through consistent care. When Harry asks Dobby for help in the final book, Dobby doesn't hesitate. There's no magical binding, no debt. It's a choice. And it's that choice that makes his sacrifice so powerful. Harry never treats Dobby as a tool, unlike so many others. Even when Dobby volunteers to help, Harry thanks him, listens to him, and never belittles his efforts. This mutual respect, rare in the magical world's hierarchical structure, becomes the bedrock of their bond. It's why Dobby is willing to lay down his life, and it's why Harry mourns him so deeply. Dobby's death isn't just sad because he was cute or funny. It's heartbreaking because he was loved. Another striking detail often missed in the films is how deeply Harry internalizes Dobby's loss. In the days that follow, Harry reflects not only on the elf's bravery, but on the injustice of a world where someone like Dobby has to die to make a difference. This loss sharpens Harry's resolve and humanizes the cost of war. It isn't just great wizards who die, it's the quiet heroes too, and Harry carries that weight. The grave itself becomes a sacred symbol. Located on the beach near Shell Cottage, it is untouched by magic. Harry digs it manually, not out of necessity, but reverence. It's an act of penance, of gratitude, of love. In that moment, he honors not just Dobby, but everything he stood for: freedom, loyalty, courage, and most of all, friendship. In many ways, Dobby is the embodiment of the values Harry fights for. Not fame, not power, but justice and kindness. Their friendship, understated yet transformative, reminds readers that even the smallest voice can echo through history. That real change begins with empathy, and that true friends, no matter their size, status, or species, are worth everything. In the end, Dobby's story is one of the most tragic and beautiful in the entire series. It shows that heroism doesn't always wear a scar or carry a wand. Sometimes it comes wrapped in mismatched socks and a trembling voice saying, "Harry Potter is brave and noble." Through their bond, both Dobby and Harry became better. One found freedom, and the other found a friend who would never let him down. Number 17, The Mirror of Sirius and its Deeper Meaning. In the world of Harry Potter, some of the most powerful magic lies not in spells or curses, but in the seemingly mundane artifacts that carry with them stories of loss, redemption, and untold potential. One such artifact, barely acknowledged in the films but holding remarkable significance in the books, is the two-way mirror gifted to Harry Potter by his godfather, Sirius Black. A gift that was meant to connect them across any distance, it ultimately became a haunting symbol of regret, a lost opportunity, and eventually a lifeline in Harry's darkest hour. Sirius Black gave Harry the mirror at the end of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, a time when Harry was reeling from the horrors of the Department of Mysteries, the revelation of the prophecy, and the murder of Cedric Diggory just a year prior. Harry's connection with Sirius had deepened into a bond that resembled a blend of mentor, protector, and surrogate father. When Sirius handed Harry the mirror, he meant it as a promise, one that said, "I'll always be there." The mirror, part of a matched pair, allowed the bearer to speak to the other through it, no matter the distance. But Harry, overwhelmed and angry, never opened the package until it was too late. The mirror remained untouched in the bottom of his trunk, forgotten and collecting dust, until Sirius was gone. In a cruel twist of irony, Sirius died just weeks later, in the very battle that Harry might have prevented had he used the mirror. Desperate, heartbroken, and consumed by guilt, Harry shattered the glass in a fit of sorrow. His inaction haunted him, the weight of a missed chance pressing on him like a phantom limp. The symbolism here is deeply emotional. The mirror became not a tool, but a monument to missed opportunities, to silence when there should have been speech, and to the price of hesitation. This mirror was not just an object, it was a symbol of Harry's youthful flaws, his impulsiveness, his pride, his refusal to communicate when it mattered most. Had he used the mirror when he first began suspecting something was wrong at the Department of Mysteries, Sirius might never have died. It was perhaps one of Harry's gravest mistakes, and it was one that shaped the maturity he would need to face the war that lay ahead. Later, in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the mirror resurfaces, or rather, a shard of it. Harry glimpses an eye, blue, piercing, watching him from the broken glass, and for a moment believes it is Dumbledore himself. The moment is chilling, a strange flicker of hope in the desolation of grief and war. Only later does he discover the truth. The eye belonged to Aberforth Dumbledore, Albus's estranged younger brother. Aberforth had acquired Sirius's mirror twin and had been watching over Harry, silently, as the world burned. The significance of this connection cannot be overstated. Aberforth's intervention via the mirror leads to Harry and his friends being rescued in Hogsmeade, brought to the hidden entrance of the Room of Requirement, and ultimately playing a pivotal role in the Battle of Hogwarts. Aberforth, who had long distanced himself from the grand schemes of his brother, stepped into the war, not for the sake of the cause, but because the boy in the mirror reminded him of everything his family had lost. His sister Ariana, the Dumbledore name, and perhaps even the youth he once had before war and grief broke it. What the films failed to capture was the emotional depth this mirror represented. It wasn't just a tool, it was a scar. It linked Sirius and Harry in a tragic loop, a reminder that love sometimes comes too late and that sometimes the simplest magic, like speaking through a mirror, can be more powerful than any spell. The mirror gave Harry a second chance at connection, even if not with the person he longed for most. When Harry sees Aberforth through the mirror, it's not merely an accident, it's fate catching up, giving him a thread to hold on to. Aberforth, bitter and rough-edged, could have turned away, but he didn't. He helped. And that help was only possible because of Sirius's mirror. This chain reaction, Sirius to Harry, Harry to the mirror to Aberforth, illustrates how in Rowling's world even the smallest gestures echo across time. In the film adaptation, none of this exists. The mirror appears abruptly, tucked away without explanation, in Harry's possession during Deathly Hallows. It is simply there, and its magic is presented without context, a narrative shortcut that lacks the powerful emotional resonance of the book's version. The audience is left puzzled, unaware of the weight it carried, of the guilt Harry bore, or of the silent vigil Aberforth kept through its shattered surface. By omitting the mirror's backstory, the films lost an opportunity to explore the complexity of Harry's grief. He didn't just lose Sirius, he failed him, and that failure taught Harry a lesson far more valuable than any taught in a Hogwarts classroom. It taught him to listen, to reach out, and to never again leave a word unsaid when it could save a life. The mirror became a turning point not through action, but through absence. In Order of the Phoenix, Sirius tells Harry, "You know, the world isn't split into good people and Death Eaters." It is a line that reflects Sirius's worldview, cynical yet deeply moral. The mirror becomes a physical manifestation of that complexity. Through it, Harry sees not only himself but the people who surround him in all their flawed humanity. And through it, Sirius's spirit, though gone, continues to influence the course of events. Aberforth's role is particularly poignant. A man who had turned away from heroism, who lived in the shadow of a more famous brother, chose to act because of what he saw in that mirror. It's a reminder that we are often seen when we think we are invisible, that our pain and our perseverance do not go unnoticed. The mirror became a quiet sentinel, witnessing without judgment, connecting without words. There is also a deeper layer here, the symbolism of mirrors in literature. They are portals, tools of reflection, sometimes even prophecy. In Rowling's world, the mirror of Erised showed us desire. But the two-way mirror showed us connection, how fragile it is, how vital. It wasn't about fantasy or longing, it was about reality, with all its sharp edges and missed chances. The magic of the mirror wasn't in what it could do, but in what it represented. In many ways, the mirror's return in Deathly Hallows is a resurrection, not of Sirius, but of the love he left behind. Through Aberforth's eyes, Harry found guidance when he most needed it. In a world where adults often failed him, Sirius and Aberforth, both deeply wounded men, offered him the strength he needed to continue. It was Sirius's gift and Aberforth's quiet watchfulness that lit Harry's path to the final battle. It is also important to remember that Harry carried that mirror shard with him throughout his journey. It wasn't just a magical item. It was a talisman, a fragment of his past that refused to die. He clutched it in despair, looked into it for answers, and finally found hope in the form of an unexpected ally. The mirror became his conscience, a ghost of a mistake made and a reminder never to make it again. This storyline also underscores one of the central themes of the entire series, that the dead are never truly gone. Sirius may have vanished through the veil, but the consequences of his life and of Harry's love for him echoed long after. Through the mirror, he remained present, guiding Harry in ways that even death could not prevent. The message is clear. Love, when real, transcends even the finality of the grave. The relationship between Harry and Sirius was unlike any other, and the mirror, more than any other object, captured its essence. In giving it to Harry, Sirius extended a piece of himself. In forgetting it, Harry lost something irretrievable, but in rediscovering it, he found a new kind of strength. The mirror, then, is both wound and healing. The omission of this narrative thread in the films robbed audiences of one of the series' most nuanced emotional arcs. It was a chance to show Harry's growth not just as a wizard, but as a person, someone who learns, who mourns, who matures. The mirror wasn't a plot device, it was a lesson, one that, like all great stories, needed time and space to be fully understood. In the end, the mirror wasn't about magic at all, it was about memory, about bonds that defy logic and time. It was about a godfather's love and a boy's grief, about mistakes made in silence and redemption found in reflection. It reminded readers that sometimes the most powerful moments happen when we look back and choose to act differently next time. Number 18. The Students' Rebellion Against Umbridge. It started with a decree, not a curse, not a hex, but words on parchment pinned up across the corridors of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Dolores Umbridge, clad in pink and dripping poison beneath every smile, had been granted the power to instill order at the Ministry's behest. The educational decrees, those cold, numbered chains of rules, spread like a blight through the school. Yet what neither the Ministry nor Umbridge anticipated was the response, not submission, but fire. The resistance didn't bloom in dramatic rebellion, but rather in quiet, clever defiance. In the pages of Order of the Phoenix, we see how students, bored of being silenced, insulted, and infantilized, united not under a single spell, but under an unspoken understanding Hogwarts would not bow. Fred and George Weasley, longtime masters of mischief, became the unofficial generals of this student rebellion. Their tools were not swords, but skiving snack boxes, decoy detonators, and wildfire whiz-bangs, products of their burgeoning joke shop dreams and sharp strategic minds. Their first major act of defiance came in a blaze, literally. The twins launched a series of enchanted fireworks that exploded in dragon shapes, chased students down hallways, and sang operatic solos mid-air. The chaos was glorious, but it was the symbolism that mattered most. The Weasley twins had declared open war. One firework zoomed directly at Umbridge, zigzagging just enough to make her dive for cover before it exploded in a bang that rattled the windows and left her hair smoking. Book 5, Order of the Phoenix. In this moment, Hogwarts wasn't just a castle, it was a battlefield of wills, and the students were winning, but the rebellion extended far beyond the twins. Lee Jordan, often known only as the Quidditch commentator, turned his talents toward strategically sabotaging Umbridge's efforts. He scattered dung bombs, rerouted staircases, and jinxed doorknobs. What's critical to remember is that Lee didn't act alone. There were networks of students helping him, covering for him, or simply cheering when another of Umbridge's attempts to impose control failed spectacularly. Even younger students got involved. A particularly clever second year claimed he'd seen a six-eyed goat giving a lecture on transfiguration. This surreal lie, told with utter conviction, had Umbridge seething with frustration. She couldn't punish imagination after all. These moments, seemingly trivial, were acts of rebellion, cloaked in absurdity. They chipped away at her authority not with violence, but with laughter. Luna Lovegood played her part too. In her strange, quiet way, she sowed confusion among the inquisitorial squad. One moment, she'd be reading the Quibbler upside down in the library. The next, she'd be seen floating through the hallways, claiming she'd heard voices from the Room of Requirement. While the others resisted with fireworks and falsehoods, Luna resisted with eccentric unpredictability, making it impossible for Umbridge to maintain order. Then came the enchanted swamp. Fred and George, knowing their time at Hogwarts was nearing an explosive end, left a parting gift, a corridor transformed into a magical swamp that even Flitwick later admitted was so brilliantly done he left part of it intact as a tribute. This wasn't just mischief, it was a statement. The swamp, smelly and stubbornly magical, stood as a living reminder that Umbridge had not broken them. In the books, the revolt has texture. It's not one battle, but many small skirmishes, each fueled by defiant creativity. Even the library wasn't safe. When Umbridge banned certain books and limited access to knowledge, students copied pages in secret, enchanted texts to fly from shelf to shelf, or simply whispered secrets to each other in coded messages. Neville Longbottom, often underestimated, began to step forward. Inspired by Dumbledore's army, he practiced jinxes and hexes long into the night. When Umbridge attempted to interrogate students, Neville was among those who refused to crack. His bravery was quiet but unshakable. "Dumbledore's army lives on," he said once. And it wasn't just a rallying cry, it was truth. Cho Chang's friend Marietta Edgecombe betrayed the DA, and yet even in this betrayal the students had prepared. Hermione Granger, ever ahead of the game, had jinxed the parchment every DA member signed, so that Marietta's face erupted in painful, pustular letters spelling sneak. It was a grim but effective deterrent. The DA wasn't a fantasy, it had rules, strategy, and consequences. The Room of Requirement became more than a hideout, it was a sanctuary. Students trained there not just to fight Death Eaters, but to reclaim their dignity. Here, under Harry's sometimes impatient but passionate guidance, they learned to cast Patronuses, deflect curses, and find the courage that their official curriculum denied them. In one poignant scene, after Harry demonstrates the Patronus, a student asks, "Is it always this hard?" Harry responds, "That's why we're here." These students weren't training for grades, they were preparing for war. And in that context, every prank, every detour, every small act of resistance outside the room became part of a larger struggle for freedom. One cannot forget Peeves, the poltergeist, who had never obeyed anyone until Fred and George, on their exit, gave him a command, "Give her hell from us, Peeves." And Peeves, grinning with delight, saluted them. For the first time, chaos had a cause. Peeves didn't just create mischief, he became a symbol of rebellion, tying rugs across corridors, dropping chandeliers, and eluding capture with glee. The inquisitorial squad, led by Draco Malfoy, tried to hold the line. They patrolled the corridors like junior tyrants, abusing their new powers, but even their efforts were undermined. Students slipped false passwords, swapped classes without notice, or enchanted their own names to appear on fake Dumbledore's army lists, confusing the investigators. When Umbridge tried to ban all student organizations, it backfired. Groups went underground. A Gobstones club supposedly dedicated to strategic logic games was actually teaching shield charms. A wizard poetry society turned out to be dueling practice. Every suppression led to adaptation. Hogwarts was alive, and it resisted. Trelawney's near eviction stirred outrage among the students, who watched as she was publicly humiliated. Though it was Dumbledore who ultimately protected her, the students whispered in corners, passed messages through moving staircases, and enchanted portraits to keep watch for any more ministry cruelty. It was an uprising of whispers, symbols, and spellcraft. Even the castle itself seemed to push back. The staircases misbehaved more than usual. The suits of armor occasionally shouted insults at Umbridge, and once a door refused to open for her, despite her screams. Perhaps Hogwarts, sensing the injustice, joined in the revolt. Or perhaps it was the students, quietly enchanting the building itself to misbehave. What the film adaptation failed to capture was this spirit of daily defiance. The movie condenses the rebellion into a few moments, fireworks, one great escape, but the book shows us a siege from within. Hogwarts becomes a living, breathing resistance cell, and every student a piece of the machine. Hermione and Ron did not stand idly by. Hermione organized the DA meetings, kept the list of members, and tracked who could be trusted. Ron, ever loyal, trained hard despite his self-doubt and encouraged others. They were no longer sidekicks but co-conspirators. The Golden Trio became the backbone of the movement. Even Argus Filch, always a thorn in students' sides, struggled to enforce the new regime. The filibuster fireworks, portable swamps, and various jinxes made his life miserable. But he too was part of the story, an unwilling participant in a war where every hallway was a new battlefield. In the end, it wasn't one grand act that shattered Umbridge's control. It was the 1,000 tiny rebellions, the false goat lecture, the enchanted staircase, the swamp that refused to vanish. It was laughter in the face of tyranny, spells whispered in secret, and the belief that learning and life meant more than obedience. The student uprising in Order of the Phoenix is not about violence. It's about courage, the courage to say no, the courage to fight back, even when your wand is shaking, and the courage to believe that even a 15-year-old can stand for something bigger than themselves. They weren't soldiers, they were children, but they defended their school as fiercely as any auror. In doing so, they reminded the wizarding world that resistance is not always loud. Sometimes it crackles like fireworks, or lingers in the stink of a magical swamp, or hides in the laughter of a six-eyed goat teaching transfiguration. And sometimes it wins. Number 19, Professor Binns and the Early Hints of Horcruxes. In the chilly silence of a Hogwarts classroom, where dust floated lazily through beams of pale light and ghostly whispers of parchment rustled across empty desks, the most unlikely herald of darkness spoke with a voice as dry as parchment and as steady as time. Professor Cuthbert Binns, the only ghost teacher in the castle, delivered his history of magic lectures with relentless consistency, unaffected by student boredom, uninspired by curiosity, and entirely oblivious to the living world. Yet in one unforgettable lesson, amid the droning cadence of magical wars and wizarding treaties, Binns brushed against a subject far darker than any he had ever detailed before. It was during this moment, hidden like a thread of shadow in a tapestry of facts, that the truth of Horcruxes first stirred before Harry Potter. The films may have bestowed the honour of unveiling the Horcruxes mystery upon Albus Dumbledore, yet it was Binns who opened the first door to that dreadful knowledge. In the Chamber of Secrets, long before Voldemort's fractured soul was understood, it was Binns who explained the tale of the chamber itself, a legend steeped in bloodlines, hatred, and the primal magic of Salazar Slytherin. During that lesson, Harry, Ron, and Hermione sat enraptured, not by the style of delivery — Binns was hardly theatrical — but by the gravity of the legend he relayed. A tale of horror and bloodshed, he muttered, almost with disdain for its drama, yet he told it none the less because it was history. Real, murky, painful history. The importance of Binns in the literary narrative cannot be overstated. While he never directly said the word Horcrux, his tale introduced the concept of magical preservation through blood and lineage, setting the stage for the audience to later grasp the full extent of Voldemort's unnatural longevity. It was Professor Binns who first gave voice to Salazar Slytherin's desire for purity, who outlined the notion that Slytherin had built a secret chamber hidden beneath the school, in which only his true heir could command a monster that would rid Hogwarts of those he deemed unworthy. Within that chilling fairy tale lived the echo of the magic Voldemort would one day use to tear his soul apart. Binns was an enigma of the academic world. He had died in his sleep in the staff room and, without much fuss, simply woke up and continued his duties, leaving his body behind. Nobody particularly noticed, Rowling wrote, humorously underlining his irrelevance to the lively world around him. Yet this irrelevance made him the perfect vessel for dangerous truth. Detached from emotion and impervious to excitement, he spoke of ancient terror with the same tone used to describe goblin uprisings. There was no hysteria in his account of Slytherin's heir, only a dry intellectual recounting, which perhaps made it all the more disturbing. In that lesson, when Hermione interrupted to ask about the chamber's veracity, Binns responded with academic scorn, refusing to dignify what he called myths with legitimacy. But despite his skepticism, he revealed key components of the legend that were rooted in truth. Slytherin had built a hidden chamber, he explained, and sealed it with his own magical knowledge inaccessible to any but his heir. This concept, that knowledge and power could be reserved through bloodlines and magic, was essential to the theory behind Horcruxes. It foreshadowed the twisted logic Tom Riddle would adopt in using ancient magic to shield fragments of his soul. The students in the classroom didn't know they were hearing the prelude to Voldemort's deepest secret. To them, It was a ghost droning about a haunted bathroom and an angry founder. But for the reader, Rowling had planted a seed quietly, surgically. Later, when Dumbledore introduces Horcruxes and describes Voldemort's quest for immortality, the memory of that earlier lesson returns, chillingly familiar. The chamber had been real, the air had been real, and the monster, a basilisk, had been waiting in the dark for decades, a symbol of death tied to Slytherin's ideology and Riddle's obsession with dominance. Professor Binns never appeared in the films, a curious omission that stripped Hogwarts of one of its most unusual features. While minor in plot, Binns embodied a type of dry, bureaucratic wizarding culture, one uninterested in students, immune to curiosity, and yet accidentally informative. He was the unintentional catalyst. Had he not told the legend, had he not sparked Hermione's research instinct and Harry's suspicion, the trio might never have investigated further. Binns's role, while ghostly and forgettable on the surface, turned out to be vital. It is ironic that a ghost, a being caught between life and death, was the first to hint at the darkest of all magical sins. Horcruxes, after all, are born of murder and created through the deliberate fracturing of the soul. They are an affront to both life and death, to morality and nature. That the first whisper of this practice should come from a teacher who died and refused to leave is almost poetic. Binns was frozen in time, and so was the history he taught. Voldemort, in a way, sought the same kind of permanence, only through horror. While Binns himself never returned to the topic of the chamber, and likely forgot he'd even discussed it, the implications of his lesson rippled through the series. Later, as Harry uncovered more about Tom Riddle's past, the connection to Slytherin's legacy became unavoidable. Riddle had been obsessed with ancestry, with power, with secrecy. He had uncovered the chamber, controlled the basilisk, and committed murder, his first act of soul-splitting, which would become the foundation of his Horcruxes. Binns's tale, however dry, was the gateway to that hidden truth. Rowling uses Binns to great narrative effect, contrasting his monotonous delivery with the explosive nature of the content he conveys. It is a clever device. Readers expect nothing from him and are thus caught off guard when his lesson becomes a portal to understanding Voldemort. In this way, Binns is both a comic relief and a key, one whose purpose lies in passing knowledge that no one else dared to speak so plainly. It is worth noting that Binns never believed in the chamber's existence. His insistence that it was fiction speaks volumes about the wizarding world's tendency to ignore the past when it becomes too uncomfortable. Like many scholars, Binns clung to his version of truth, built on facts and texts and established theories. But magic, especially dark magic, does not always leave a trail of books and scrolls. Sometimes it festers in the cracks of castles, waiting to be remembered by children brave enough to listen. This dichotomy between historical fact and magical legend is embodied in Binns. He cannot see the forest for the trees. When students show interest in the story, he grows irritated. He does not want to explore the unknown. And yet his lesson opens the door to it. The ghost professor becomes an unwitting storyteller, a relic who accidentally fuels the future. His tale leads to Myrtle's bathroom, to the basilisk's lair, to Tom Riddle's diary, another Horcrux hidden in plain sight. Binns's classroom was always cold. Students often left with less knowledge than they entered with, lulled into a stupor by his eternal monologue. Yet for one shining moment, that room became a place of revelation. The students for once leaned forward. The silence held meaning. Even Ron paid attention. It was a rare spark in Binns's otherwise uneventful eternity. In that moment, he shaped the course of history without even noticing. The Chamber of Secrets itself, as later revealed, was more than a hidden room. It was a symbol of Voldemort's descent. When young Tom Riddle found it, he was still a student, still capable of charm and deception. But the murder of Myrtle, committed to unleash the basilisk, marked a turning point. It was the moment he shed his final ties to humanity. That act, hidden for decades, was later traced back to Binns's lesson, to the question Hermione asked, to the curiosity he tried to suppress. Even when Dumbledore speaks of Horcruxes years later, the echoes of that early lesson are felt. He describes the diary as a Horcrux, yes, but not one you had any reason to suspect. Yet Harry had, in fact, suspected. The diary had possessed Ginny, had controlled her, had spoken to her. It was alive. That cursed object, rooted in the very same tale Binns once told, became the first piece of Voldemort's soul to be destroyed. The circle, begun in that history of magic lesson, had come to close. What makes Binns remarkable is not his personality, he had none, but his position. He is memory incarnate. Trapped between worlds, he cannot evolve, cannot feel, cannot love or hate. He is only the voice of what was. And in that he reflects the horror of Voldemort, whose Horcruxes turned him into something similar, a half-man without soul, anchored to history, incapable of connection. Binns is the mirror of what Voldemort became, but without the malice. In the end, Professor Binns fades from the narrative. He never learns of the role he played. He continues his lectures, repeats the same facts, forgets the names of his students, but for those who listen carefully, who read beyond the surface, he remains a guardian of an ancient truth, not a hero, not a villain, just a historian, doomed to tell stories he doesn't understand, stories that sometimes change the world. Number 20, Peeves, the Poltergeist, and his missing role. Few characters in the Harry Potter universe embody chaos as completely as Peeves the Poltergeist. His name, whispered in hallways or groaned in frustration by weary professors, is synonymous with anarchy wrapped in rhyme. He's the spirit of rebellion in spectral form, the jester who mocks authority and makes the hallowed halls of Hogwarts echo with laughter and destruction. Yet for all his mischief, Peeves is more than just a source of comic relief. He is a symbol and, strangely, a protector. Peeves is not a ghost. That distinction matters. Ghosts in the wizarding world, nearly Headless Nick, the Grey Lady, the Bloody Baron, and the Fat Friar, are echoes of once living souls, remnants tethered by choice or fear. Peeves, however, was never alive. He is a poltergeist, born of chaos and fed by disruption. Unlike the mournful ghosts, he revels in bedlam. From the first moment readers encounter him in Philosopher's Stone, dropping chalk through keyholes and overturning wastebaskets, he is firmly established as the uncontrollable element within the otherwise rule-bound institution. Peeves's pranks often come at the expense of both student and staff, but his chaos serves a deeper function. Hogwarts, for all its traditions, is a place where order and disorder coexist. Peeves represents the latter, an ancient, chaotic force that refuses to be tamed. His existence is tolerated, barely, by the administration and entirely adored by students. Argus Filch, the cantankerous caretaker, hates him with a vengeance. "That bloody poltergeist," he mutters, his face purple with rage, often chasing shadows and curses left in Peeves's wake. The few figures who manage to command even the slightest obedience from Peeves reveal something interesting about him. He respects, in his own twisted way, only true strength. The Bloody Baron, with his blood-stained robes and terrifying silence, can silence Peeves with a glance. And Albus Dumbledore, with his commanding presence and twinkle of mischief, manages to keep the poltergeist in check, just barely. But even then, Peeves often skirts the edge of defiance, always one step from complete disobedience. When Dumbledore leaves Hogwarts in Order of the Phoenix, Peeves becomes more emboldened than ever. The absence of Peeves in the Harry Potter films is a wound felt by many fans. Originally cast to be played by British comedian Rick Mayall, known for his outrageous performances and wild-eyed charm, the role was filmed but ultimately cut. Director Chris Columbus reportedly found Peeves too difficult to fit tonally into the film. But it is precisely that tonal dissonance, the chaos in contrast with order, that made Peeves essential. His absence robbed viewers of one of the most anarchic and entertaining forces within Hogwarts. It also erased an important cultural element of the school, its resistance to authority, even from within. Peeves was never a neutral figure. He chose sides. When Dolores Umbridge took control of Hogwarts, it was Peeves who became her most persistent enemy. He flooded hallways, shattered windows, upturned desks, and created havoc wherever she turned. It wasn't mere fun, it was resistance. While many feared the new regime, Peeves waged a one-spectre war against it. At one point, he even unscrewed a chandelier just as Umbridge entered a room. Professor McGonagall, who usually maintained a strict professional distance, whispered, "It unscrews the other way," in support of his antics. That moment, unspoken in the films but treasured by readers, became a fan-favorite example of unspoken solidarity against tyranny. He also played a surprisingly crucial role in the Battle of Hogwarts. When Voldemort's forces breached the castle in Deathly Hallows, Peeves joined the defense, not through direct combat, but with a barrage of pranks, traps, and psychological warfare. He sang gleefully as he dropped heavy objects onto Death Eaters and confused the enemy with misleading signs. In the words of Professor Flitwick, even Peeves has earned his keep. His chaotic energy became a weapon of war, though never truly controlled for once. Peeves used his mischief for a cause greater than himself. Despite his centrality to certain events, Peeves's origin remains shrouded in mystery. He seems to have been part of Hogwarts for centuries, a fixture as old as the walls. It is said he was born from the accumulated mischief and emotional energy of the students, a personification of youthful rebellion that grew over time. His name appears in school records dating back at least to the 18th century. In Hogwarts, a history, which Hermione often quotes, Peeves is mentioned as a malevolent nuisance of long standing. His pranks have ranged from simple toilet explosions to full-scale flooding of the dungeons. Peeves's rhyme is another curious quirk. He often communicates in sing-song riddles, sometimes funny, sometimes terrifying. When Lupin's resignation was announced, he sang "Loony Loopy Lupin," echoing both childlike cruelty and surreal insight. During the Battle of Hogwarts, he sang, "Give me a Voldy-Moldy, give me a fright, I'll drop a vase on his head tonight." His rhymes reflect the absurdity of the world around him and offer a lens of satire on the often grave events unfolding at Hogwarts. In the books, his relationship with the staff is a masterclass in boundary pushing. He targets Professor Snape with a kind of gleeful malice, once singing, "Oh, Potter, you rotter," to infuriate him, and often pelting him with ink-filled balloons. Snape, in turn, dreams of exorcising him permanently. Yet no spell, not even those from Dumbledore or Flitwick, could ever remove Peeves. He exists outside the usual magical rules. The enchantments of the castle seem to protect him, or perhaps in a deeper sense, he is one of those enchantments. Students see Peeves as both a menace and a hero. Fred and George Weasley in particular idolize him. During their grand exit in Order of the Phoenix, they set off enchanted fireworks and left Peeves a parting gift, a portable swamp. It was a tribute to his legacy. Even more telling was Peeves's farewell to Umbridge, where he bowed deeply and dropped a cane on her head in salute. That wasn't just prankery, it was theatre. There's something Shakespearean in Peeves. He is the fool, the jester, the truth-teller in madness. Like King Lear's fool, he mocks the powerful and exposes their flaws, hiding insight in absurdity. He's a spectral embodiment of the idea that sometimes only chaos can reveal truth. That beneath the order, imposed by rules, uniforms, and spells, there lies a human need to question, to laugh, to rebel. His absence from the films has created a curious divide between book readers and movie watchers. Those who know Peeves often speak of him with affection. To them, Hogwarts without Peeves feels hollow. The school, alive with secret passageways and talking portraits, loses a bit of its anarchic charm without its resident poltergeist. What is magic, after all, if not a celebration of the unexpected? When Harry and his friends sneaked through the castle, it was not just Filch or the inquisitorial squad they had to avoid. It was Peeves who might alert the staff with a shout or help them with a distraction, depending on his mood. He was the wild card, unpredictable and omnipresent. Peeves turned every corridor into a potential comedy or catastrophe. In that sense, he forced students to be clever, fast, and ever alert. His presence shaped their behavior more than most teachers did. There's an irony to Peeves's enduring presence in fan culture. Though omitted from the screen, he remains alive through fan art, fan fiction, and the collective memory of readers. He appears in video games like Hogwarts Legacy, where his antics delight a new generation, his laugh still echoes, his rhymes still irritate, his cane still swings. The most telling detail about Peeves is that in a world filled with dark magic, murder, and war, he never kills. His chaos is loud, disruptive, often dangerous, but never lethal. That restraint, conscious or otherwise, sets him apart. He is mischief, not malice. His world is one of whoopee cushions and exploding inkpots, not curses and cruelty. In a way, Peeves represents the best and worst of unchecked freedom. And then there's the curious fact that Hogwarts tolerates him. Dumbledore never banishes him. McGonagall never curses him away. Even Filch, in his rage, never succeeds in driving him out. The castle accepts him, perhaps even needs him, like the room of requirement, like the shifting staircases, like the talking hats and whispering walls. Peeves is part of the school's soul. In the end, Peeves's fate is unresolved. After the war, he presumably remains haunting the corridors, annoying the new headmistress, perhaps befriending a new generation of pranksters. His story doesn't end with Voldemort's defeat. It continues because chaos never dies. It merely changes shape. If Hogwarts is a living being with a heart and mind of its own, then Peeves is its laughter, its madness, its irreverent, untamed soul. And maybe that is why he remains, not because he cannot be banished, but because he must not be. In a world that constantly demands obedience, Peeves reminds us of the value of rebellion, for laughter, for justice, and sometimes simply because it's fun, and that, perhaps, is his greatest legacy. Number 21, the continuing legacy of the Mirror of Erised. Of all the magical artifacts scattered throughout the Harry Potter universe, few have left as deep an emotional imprint as the Mirror of Erised. Introduced in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the mirror shows not one's reflection, but one's heart's deepest desire. When Harry first encountered it, hidden away in a forgotten classroom, he saw what he longed for more than anything, his mother and father standing beside him, smiling. This moment, fragile, heartbreaking, luminous, became the emotional centerpiece of the first story. And yet, like so many threads in the cinematic adaptations, the mirror's journey was quietly set aside after the first film. But in the books, its spirit lingers, echoing through memories, reflections, and even fragments of glass. Dumbledore warned Harry about the dangers of such a mirror. "It does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live," he said, a quote that has since become emblematic of the series' wisdom. The mirror had caused too many students to lose themselves in visions of what could never be. It was removed, hidden away where it could no longer tempt those who yearned for impossible things. But while it physically vanished from Hogwarts halls, the lessons it embodied never did. The mirror, in a subtle way, became a symbol of longing, loss, and the quiet endurance of memory. Throughout the series, echoes of the Mirror of Erised appear in other forms. They are not as literal, perhaps, but just as emotionally powerful. Every time Harry sees a photo of his parents in the magical photo album Hagrid gave him, he's revisiting that longing. Every encounter with the shades of the dead, whether in the graveyard, the resurrection stone's visions, or the echoes from Voldemort's wand in the Priori Incantatem, are reflections of that first moment before the mirror. Each vision reminds us the dead remain with us, if not in body, then in desire. The mirror's most unexpected return comes during the final installment of the series, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. There, its physical form does not reappear, but a shard, a mere fragment, finds its way back into the story, hidden inside a two-way mirror that Sirius Black once gifted to Harry. This shard, embedded with both practical and symbolic power, allows Harry to glimpse someone watching him, someone whose blue eyes feel oddly familiar. Only much later does he learn it is Aberforth Dumbledore, Albus's estranged brother. It is not Erised, but its cousin, in essence, a portal through which love, legacy, and the past continue to reach forward. That fragment becomes one of the last remaining links between Harry and those who came before. It serves as a reminder that even broken things can hold power. Even shattered mirrors reflect light. When Harry, trapped in Malfoy Manor, calls out for help and Aberforth sees him through the shard, it is as though the spirit of the mirror of Erised, its aching hopefulness, has returned. It no longer shows dreams, but it saves lives. This transformation from illusion to action marks the maturation of both the artifact and its bearer. Imagine then how the films might have explored this. The emotional resonance of the mirror of Erised, had it been woven throughout the visual narrative, could have become a symbol of Harry's emotional evolution. From a child desperate to know his parents, to a young man who honors their memory through courage and sacrifice, the mirror's story is his own. The visual motif of reflections, of seeing not what is, but what was lost, could have followed him through every installment. Consider the moment when Harry is in Grimmauld Place, staring into the dusty, broken mirror fragment Sirius left behind. It's brief in the books, a flicker of recognition. But cinematically, this could have been a powerful callback. The same solemn music from the first film, the same play of light. Harry looking into the glass, not to see his parents now, but something older, rougher and yet still human. Aberforth's eyes, not Albus, but close enough to stir something within him. This link between Aberforth and Albus is important. The books reveal the fractured relationship between the brothers, torn by tragedy and secrets. The mirror shard becomes a symbolic reconciliation. Through it, Aberforth aids the cause his brother died for, helps the boy his brother protected, and honors the past he tried so long to forget. It is subtle, but it is there, an invisible healing, like gold, filling the cracks in a broken vase. The Mirror of Erised is not about dreams alone, it is about the weight of desire. In Philosopher's Stone, Harry visits it night after night. He had to tear his eyes away from his mother's face. This line tells us everything. The mirror tempts not with pleasure, but with pain. It offers comfort, but only the kind that stings when withdrawn. For Dumbledore, who once saw his entire family whole and happy, the mirror was a cruel reminder of the cost of ambition. For Harry, it was a glimpse of something he never had. And yet, as he grows, he learns not to chase ghosts, but to fight for the living. In Order of the Phoenix, when Sirius dies, Harry's grief reopens that wound. He breaks furniture, yells at Dumbledore, blames himself. In the aftermath, the broken mirror he never used, Sirius's gift, sits uselessly in his trunk. And yet, it is still there. The unspoken presence of that object continues the mirror's narrative. It is now cracked, like Harry's heart. It will only show its use much later, but in literary terms, it's a Chekhov's gun, waiting quietly on the wall. The irony of the mirror is that it shows the truth behind the lie. It reflects what the heart wants, not what the mind knows. That is why it had to be removed from Hogwarts. And yet, that is also why it never truly disappeared. The books are full of mirrors, literal and figurative. The Pensieve, for example, is another kind of mirror, revealing memories rather than desires. But like Erised, it shows us not just events, but emotions embedded in time. When Harry sees Snape's memories in the final book, it is again a mirror of truth, devastating, illuminating. The omission of the mirror's return in the films leaves a quiet hole. Not a plot hole, but an emotional one. The films had the opportunity to remind us that the past is not something to erase, but something to live alongside. A simple scene, Harry gazing at the shard, seeing Aberforth's eye, understanding that help is still possible even from those we've misunderstood, could have tied the beginning and end of his journey together with poetic symmetry. Even more, the mirror could have been used visually as a motif for all the characters shaped by grief and desire. For Severus Snape, who saw Lily in his heart every day. For Remus Lupin, torn between love and fear. For Dumbledore himself, who carried guilt like a shadow. Each of them might have looked into Erised, and seen something different, yet each would be haunted by what they saw. The mirror is not a mere device, it is a character in its own right, a silent witness to the inner lives of those who pass before it. When Harry uses the resurrection stone surrounded by his parents, Sirius and Remus, it is not the mirror that shows them, but the spirit of the mirror lingers. These are the same figures he once saw in a frame of gold and glass. Now they stand with him not as dreams but as memories, shaped into strength. He no longer needs a rest. He carries their love within him. That evolution from desire to legacy is the arc of his emotional growth. The Shard's final appearance in the Battle of Hogwarts carries no fanfare. Aberforth uses it to communicate, to save lives, to open the way for resistance. It is no longer a tool of yearning but of action. That shift is crucial. What once paralyzed students with longing is now used to organize survival. It is, in every sense, a redemption of magic, and perhaps of the Dumbledore family as well. The Mirror of Erased, then, is more than a relic of the first book. It is a thread of silver running quietly through the tapestry of the story. From the child staring into a vision of his parents to the young man facing death with the knowledge that he has known love, the mirror charts Harry's emotional transformation. It teaches us not just about what we desire, but about what we do with that desire. If the films had embraced this symbolism, they could have created a visual arc from light to shadow to light again. The mirror, glimpsed in fragments, returning at key moments, not always spoken of but always felt, would have deepened the emotional landscape. But even without it, the books remain a rich map of these themes. As readers, we see what Harry sees, and like him, we learn to let go of illusions in favor of truth. In the end, the Mirror of Erased doesn't disappear, it changes form. It becomes a shard, a whisper, a shadow on a wall. And yet it remains, like love, like grief, like memory, hidden perhaps, but always there, waiting for those who dare to look beyond the surface. Number 22. The Unspoken Love Triangle, Bill, Fleur, and Tonks. Of all the intricate character arcs woven through the tapestry of the Harry Potter series, few are as subtly portrayed as the emotional depth and quiet complexities of Nymphadora Tonks. Known to most readers as the clumsy, colourful-haired Aura, with a quick smile and a noble heart, Tonks is rarely viewed through the lens of unrequited affection. Yet between the lines of J.K. Rowling's storytelling, there are fleeting moments, whispers almost, that suggest a subplot left largely unexplored, a brief and unspoken fondness for Bill Weasley. Before Tonks ever gazed longingly at the haunted, scarred face of Remus Lupin, she worked alongside Bill. Both were part of the Order of the Phoenix, and it is during these meetings and missions that Tonks and Bill began to share time, purpose, and camaraderie. Though Rowling never spells it out plainly, there is something in Tonks's demeanour, a subtle shift, that hints at a flicker of interest. Readers may remember that in Order of the Phoenix, Tonks is often seen in the company of Bill, laughing, planning, exchanging glances in Grimmauld Place. What is particularly curious is the emotional shadow that seems to fall over Tonks in Half-Blood Prince. Rowling describes her as depressed and pale, her hair mousy and dull. While this is ultimately explained as being due to Lupin's refusal to be with her, citing his age, his condition, and his fear of endangering her, some fans have speculated whether Tonks's sadness could have had another root, at least in part, the realization that Bill was truly falling in love with Fleur Delacour. Fleur was from the beginning a dazzling and divisive presence. Her beauty, elegance, and pride drew attention and criticism in equal measure. When she and Bill announced their relationship, few in the Weasley household were thrilled. Molly, in particular, seemed to disapprove, but while Molly's objections were loud and clear, Tonks's reaction was much quieter, and arguably more telling. She withdrew. She became reserved. Even her signature magical ability, her metamorph magus talent, suffered. Her bright hair dulled, her energy waned. In Half-Blood Prince, Molly remarks to Harry, Tonks has been very down lately. I think it's to do with Sirius's death. But when Harry suggests that grief can't last forever, Molly adds, I suppose, but she was always so cheerful before. Later, Lupin himself will reveal that Tonks is in love with him and that he has refused her. This is indeed the central cause of her despair. But the timeline leaves open a small window, just wide enough, for another possibility. What if her growing affection for Lupin was born not from nothing, but rather as a shift from an earlier, quieter disappointment? Tonks admired Bill, that much seems clear. His charm was not the overconfident swagger of someone like Lockhart, but rather the effortless magnetism of a man who was confident without needing to boast. Bill was handsome, adventurous, fiercely loyal, and importantly kind. Working with him on missions for the Order, it is easy to imagine Tonks being drawn to him. And yet, Bill's attention, eventually and entirely, turned to Fleur. The change in Tonks was not only internal. Rowling makes a point to describe her transformations as less vivid, less playful. Her hair was a washed-out mouse brown, and her face looked drawn and pale, Harry observes during a Christmas visit to the Burrow. This is not the Tonks we met earlier in the series, the woman who tripped over umbrella stands and coloured her hair bubblegum pink for fun. This is someone emotionally withdrawn, burdened. The contrast is stark and revealing. Some might argue that love triangles are a trope, and one thankfully avoided in the Harry Potter series. But in truth, Rowling never fully avoids the complexity of emotion. She just hides it in more nuanced ways. The Tonks-Bill-Fleur situation is not a triangle in the dramatic sense, but rather a quiet corner of emotional ambiguity. There is no jealousy, no outburst, no confessions, just the shadow of something that might have been, quietly replaced by something stronger and truer. Indeed, what makes this subplot so poignant is how maturely it is handled. Tonks never vocalizes any resentment. She never behaves with cruelty or pettiness toward Fleur. In fact, when Fleur proves her love for Bill by standing by him after he is mauled by Fenrir Greyback, it is Tonks who, by example, helps others accept that love can be real even in the most unusual or trying of circumstances. Her declaration to Lupin, you see, she still wants to marry him even though he's been bitten, she doesn't care, is both a defense of Fleur and a plea for herself. It is in this moment that everything becomes clear. The love Tonks holds for Lupin, and perhaps earlier for Bill, is not superficial. It is rooted in loyalty, in acceptance, in courage. She doesn't want a perfect man. She wants someone worth loving, someone who challenges her and who needs her. Bill was never that man for her, but it's possible that she thought he might be. When he chose Fleur, she stepped back quietly, with grace. The films, unfortunately, erase much of this emotional complexity. The entire arc between Tonks and Lupin is truncated, to the point that viewers unfamiliar with the books might be shocked to see them suddenly married with a child. There is no mention of Tonks's emotional state, her changing appearance, her longing. Even Fleur is flattened, her character reduced to stereotypes. The triangle, or more accurately, the emotional progression from Bill to Lupin, is lost entirely. But the books, remember, the books show us Tonks as more than comic relief. She is a woman who feels deeply, who carries both grief and love in silence. Her journey toward Lupin is not simple nor sudden. It is paved with disappointment, hope, and unwavering loyalty. Rowling's choice to layer these emotions subtly, through shifts in appearance, through side comments from characters like Molly, through reactions rather than revelations, makes Tonks all the more real. It's important to remember that Tonks and Bill never needed a grand love story. Sometimes affection is fleeting. Sometimes it passes like a shadow, unnoticed by others, deeply felt by one. The brilliance of Rowling's writing is in showing how such feelings can exist without needing to change the plot. They are part of the emotional fabric of the world. They make these characters more human, more fallible, more alive. In the end, Tonks finds her true match in Remus. It is not a fairy tale romance, but it is real. It is challenged by war, by fear, by the shadows of the past. But it endures. And perhaps that would never have happened without her first realizing that Bill, charming, brave, golden Bill, was not hers to love. Maybe Fleur's strength, her fierce loyalty to Bill, showed Tonks what love could look like, and helped her fight for her own. This small, easily missed emotional thread also adds dimension to Bill himself. His love for Fleur is often dismissed by others, mocked even by his own family. But he never wavers, not even after his face is mauled. He sees Fleur, not just her beauty, but her devotion. He never flirts with Tonks, never plays games, and yet his kindness may have inadvertently stirred a deeper hope in her heart. Fleur, too, comes into clearer focus through this lens. So often misunderstood, she proves her worth not with spells, but with actions. She is the one who stays. She is the one who stands beside Bill when others doubt. Her strength, often mistaken for vanity, is a different kind of magic, the kind that holds fast when everything else falls apart. In this triangle that never was, Fleur is the center of gravity that grounds them all. The quiet tragedy of Tonks's early feelings, and the grace with which she lets them go, is one of the most mature, emotional arcs in the series. It is subtle, bittersweet, and painfully human. There is no dramatic payoff, no confrontation, no romantic resolution, only change, growth, and the slow realization of where her true love lies. In a world filled with dragons, dark lords, and flying brooms, it is moments like this that remind us why the Harry Potter series endures, not because of the magic, but because of the people, their hearts, their struggles, their quiet, private stories. The triangle between Bill, Fleur, and Tonks might be imaginary, or maybe it's not. Either way, it is real in the hearts of readers who look between the lines and find there a mirror of their own silent, tender longings. Number 23, Stan Shunpike and the Fear-Driven Ministry. Stan Shunpike's name appears only briefly in the grand saga of Harry Potter, but his story cuts deeper than many might realize. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, he becomes the embodiment of fear-driven justice, of a ministry desperate not for truth, but for optics. Rowling didn't need to shout this message from the rooftops. She whispered it through the arrest of a young, awkward conductor of the night bus, a boyish, excitable lad who once proudly informed Harry of his knowledge of the magical world. Stan becomes one of the earliest examples of how the Ministry of Magic loses its moral compass in times of fear. His imprisonment tells a larger story, one not of villainy, but of institutional cowardice. Stan is first introduced in The Prisoner of Azkaban with a pimply face and a big mouth. He's not a Death Eater, nor does he seem capable of hiding any grand secret. He's a working-class wizard, a conductor on a magically chaotic bus for stranded witches and wizards. His greatest asset appears to be his talent for gossip and dramatic storytelling, and that is what makes his later fate so horrifying. He's not a threat, he's a target of convenience. When his name resurfaces in The Half-Blood Prince, it's not because he's become radicalized, it's because the ministry needs names, not real ones, just names, to soothe the masses and distract them from their growing terror. Harry's reaction is visceral. He's not a Death Eater, he insists, visibly angry when he hears of Stan's arrest. The frustration bleeds from the page. Harry, by then hardened by loss and deception, understands that the ministry is no longer trying to protect people, it's performing for them. They're just trying to make it look like they're doing something, Harry says. And he's absolutely right. The ministry is spiraling, losing grip on its authority and terrified of admitting it. So they grasp at symbols, at scapegoats. Stan is never given a trial, there is no process. He simply disappears into Azkaban, swallowed by a system more concerned with reputation than righteousness. His arrest is not about justice, it's about appearances. Scrimgeour, the newly appointed Minister for Magic, is eager to show the wizarding world that the ministry is fighting back. But behind the bravado is nothing but fear. Real Death Eaters roam free, gathering strength, while innocent faces like Stan's are locked away because they're easy to find and even easier to blame. A chilling echo of real-world injustices. Rowling's narrative choice here is deliberate. In a world where lines between good and evil are often clearly drawn, Voldemort is evil, Dumbledore is good, the Ministry becomes something else entirely. It isn't the dark or the light, it's the grey space where bureaucracies hide, making cowardly choices while claiming moral high ground. Stan's arrest is a parable, told quietly but powerfully. It's not an action scene, it's not a plot twist, it's a moral failure tucked between larger battles but no less significant. By the time Deathly Hallows begins, that fear has metastasized into tyranny. The Ministry falls under Death Eater control, but the seeds of its corruption were sown earlier. It's easy to blame Voldemort for the madness that ensues, but the truth is more uncomfortable. The Ministry's descent didn't begin with his return, it began with its own refusal to acknowledge it. It began when it prioritized its image over its integrity. And Stan's arrest is Exhibit A. It's no accident that Rowling chose someone like Stan for this role. He's not an aura, not a political figure. He's a common man. His life is simple, his role unglamorous, his innocence is obvious. That's why it hurts. That's why it matters. The Ministry doesn't need guilty men, it needs believable ones, and in their eyes, Stan's ignorance and lowly status make him the perfect pawn. The wizarding world watches him go, and most do not ask questions. When Harry breaks into the Ministry in Deathly Hallows, what he sees is not the enemy wearing a new face, it's the enemy showing its true one. He realizes that evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes it speaks with official letters, with memorandums and quiet arrests. It doesn't always come cloaked in black robes. It comes in the form of indifference, cowardice, dressed as duty. And Stan is one of the many who suffer because of it. A forgotten casualty of a war that claimed more than lives. It claimed justice. Later in the story, when Harry sees Stan again, now possibly under the Imperius curse, fighting on the wrong side, the tragedy becomes complete. The Ministry's failure didn't just imprison an innocent boy, it might have helped push him toward darkness. This is perhaps the darkest irony. In trying to look strong, the Ministry becomes the very thing it claimed to fight. It punishes the weak and creates enemies in the process. Stan is no longer just a prisoner. He becomes a symbol of a government so broken, it manufactures its own opposition. The books never provide a detailed follow-up on Stan's fate. He vanishes back into the tapestry of war, but his story lingers, because it's not just about him, it's about the choices made by those in power. It's about what happens when fear overtakes reason, when authority turns into oppression. Stan's story is an echo of the real world, of interments, of wrongful convictions, of governments that arrest the helpless to appease the fearful. Rowling's commentary is subtle but piercing. It is easy to forget the small names in epic stories, but Rowling doesn't let us. Through Stan, she reminds us that heroism is not just about defeating the Dark Lord. It's about standing up for the overlooked, the falsely accused, the voices drowned by political theatre. Harry's anger at Stan's arrest is not a subplot, it's a revelation. He realizes that the enemy is not only out there, but also within the institutions that claim to defend good. There's a line in Half-Blood Prince that haunts the reader. Stan Shunpike has been arrested on suspicion of Death Eater activity. That's it. No details, no proof, just suspicion. In the real world, suspicion has ruined lives. In Rowling's world, it lands you in Azkaban. The coldness of that line is the point. It reflects how casually innocence can be stripped away under the banner of national security. How easy it is to justify cruelty when cloaked in fear. Harry never accepts it. He refuses to let the Ministry's lies go unchallenged. In this, he steps into the role Dumbledore hoped he would, not just a warrior, but a thinker, a moral compass. He understands that to fight Voldemort, one must also reject the systems that enable him. That truth matters more than control. that justice isn't served by sacrificing the innocent for public satisfaction. The films omit this story entirely, and in doing so, they lose one of the most powerful subtexts of the books. They present a simplified version of the conflict, good versus evil, rebels versus fascists. But Rowling's version is more nuanced. It says, evil thrives not only because of dark wizards, but because of silence, because of fear, because of cowardly bureaucrats. Stan Shunpike's arrest is the canary in the coal mine. It warns of a system rotting from within. Even in the face of Voldemort's return, the Ministry's greatest fear is not death, it's losing control. And so it lashes out not at enemies, but at symbols. It punishes not those who threaten, but those who can be sacrificed. Stan Shunpike, the boy who once boasted about banshees and bedpans, becomes a token in a political game. He doesn't know the rules, he doesn't get to play, he's just removed from the board. The tragedy of Stan is that no one remembers him. In a war full of martyrs and monsters, his name fades, but perhaps it shouldn't. Perhaps we ought to remember that freedom dies not just in battlefields, but in offices and courtrooms. That injustice doesn't always wear a skull mask, it sometimes wears a ministry pin. Rowling didn't scream this message, she simply showed us a boy who loved telling ghost stories and then quietly vanished behind prison walls. There's an unspoken challenge in Stan's story. It asks us, would you speak up? Would you question authority when the world demands obedience? Would you see through the fog of fear and find the truth? Harry does. He sees Stan not as a minor detail, but as a test of his own values, and in doing so he teaches us that the fight for justice begins not with grand gestures, but with refusing to accept small injustices. In the end, Stan Shunpike is not a Death Eater. He's not a hero either. He's something far more important. He's a mirror, a reflection of what happens when we let fear guide our actions, when we choose comfort over conscience. His story doesn't need a climax or a redemption arc. It needs only to be remembered. And that is why his name matters. Not because he fought in the final battle, not because he made a great sacrifice, but because he didn't deserve what happened to him. Because the moment we forget that is the moment we allow it to happen again. Number 24, Buckbeak's Trial and Injustice in the Magical World. In the magical world of Harry Potter, creatures are rarely just beasts. They are reflections of the society that surrounds them. Buckbeak, the proud and noble hippogriff, was not simply a mode of transportation for Harry and Hermione, nor just a creature of wonder introduced in a Care of Magical Creatures class. In truth, Buckbeak's arc reveals some of the darkest aspects of the wizarding justice system, where influence trumps truth and fear often overrides reason. His story in the book Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban unfolds as a tragic courtroom drama, exposing the fragility of justice in the face of power. It began on the school grounds during what should have been a routine lesson. Hagrid, newly appointed as the Care of Magical Creatures professor, introduced his students to hippogriffs, majestic beasts with the body of a horse and the wings, head, and talons of a great eagle. Buckbeak was among them, a particularly proud creature with grey feathers and intelligent eyes. When Harry approached him properly and respectfully as Hagrid instructed, Buckbeak allowed the boy to mount him and soar over the grounds of Hogwarts, a moment of pure awe and freedom. But it took only one careless word to unravel it all. Draco Malfoy, arrogant and sneering, ignored the etiquette Hagrid had so carefully explained. He approached Buckbeak without proper respect, and when the hippogriff lashed out in defense, Malfoy was injured, though not gravely. Still, his father's influence loomed larger than the truth of the event. Lucius Malfoy, a man with deep ties in the Ministry of Magic and a long history of manipulating legal outcomes, seized this as an opportunity. Buckbeak, he insisted, was dangerous. He demanded that the creature be put down. Hagrid, devastated, could hardly believe what was happening. As he told Harry and Hermione later, "I won't let 'em kill him, I won't." But Hagrid was no lawyer. He was a kind-hearted, emotionally driven half-giant who had always lived on the margins of the wizarding world. The law, when it came to magical creatures, was complex and cruel, and often bent to the will of the powerful. The case was set to go before the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures, an ominous name that foreshadowed its likely outcome. The ministry had already made up its mind. The process was more a performance than a fair trial. The committee, composed of minor bureaucrats and cowed officials, stood no chance against the persuasive threats of Lucius Malfoy. Hagrid brought Buckbeak to London, trying desperately to argue for the creature's life. Hermione, ever the brilliant strategist, began researching precedents and writing letters. Harry stood by, equally outraged but powerless within the confines of ministry law. The verdict came swiftly. Despite Hagrid's pleas and Hermione's careful documentation, the committee sentenced Buckbeak to death. It was a moment of pure injustice, masked in legal procedure. "He's got no chance," Hagrid admitted tearfully. "Lucius Malfoy's fixed it all up." And so it was that the fate of a creature who had done no wrong was sealed, not by truth or fairness, but by influence and fear. The execution was scheduled at sunset on the grounds of Hogwarts. A symbolic choice, quiet, out of the public eye, surrounded by ancient walls that had seen too many shadows fall. It was to be carried out by Walden McNair, an executioner with a chilling past and even colder eyes. That the ministry chose a man like him spoke volumes. Buckbeak, though unaware of the full human machinations behind his fate, sensed something. He had grown agitated, restless. Animals understand more than they are given credit for. Hermione's anguish turned into action. She and Harry had learned of a secret hidden within time itself, a tool Dumbledore subtly granted them, entrusting Hermione with a time-turner that could undo moments past. With the fate of both Buckbeak and Sirius Black hanging in the balance, they leapt through time to rewrite history in silence. What followed was a delicate, dangerous dance through their own past, a moment where magic became the last hope for justice. Their plan was simple in theory, almost impossible in practice. They had to wait in the shadows, unseen, until the moment just before Buckbeak's execution. There, hidden by trees, they watched as the executioner raised his axe, but the blow never fell. With the careful stealth that only children desperate to save a life can possess, they approached Buckbeak and untied him. Hermione whispered gentle words. Harry urged him forward, and together they led him away into the forest. Just in time. It was a miracle that nobody saw them. When McNair swung the axe, it landed on a pumpkin, not on the neck of a living creature. The adults believed the deed was done. Buckbeak was free. That moment, that secret rescue, became one of the most powerful instances of rebellion in the series. Not a rebellion of wands and curses, but of heart and courage, of choosing to do what is right, even when the world insists on wrong. Yet even as Buckbeak soared into the night sky, with Sirius Black on his back, the deeper wound remained. This was not just a story of a creature saved. It was a reminder of how dangerously flawed the wizarding justice system could be. The Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures had not sought truth. It had bowed to Lucius Malfoy's pressure, prioritized appearances, and condemned an innocent life with barely a second thought. The books never shied away from this truth. Rowling deliberately constructed the trial of Buckbeak to mirror real-world injustices. It showed readers, young and old, that even in a world of magic, bureaucracy and corruption can be lethal, that those without power, be they creatures or people, can be sacrificed unless someone speaks up. As Dumbledore himself would later say, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are." In the film adaptation, much of this was trimmed down. The trial, the legal documents, the emotional weight of Hagrid's desperate hope, Hermione's research, and the cold reality of McNair's presence, all these elements were reduced to fleeting moments. Buckbeak's rescue still occurred, but the depth of his peril was diluted. The audience never felt the same rage, the same helplessness, the same relief when the axe missed its mark. What was a central ethical arc in the book became a background subplot in the film. That choice, while understandable for cinematic pacing, robbed Buckbeak of his voice. The creature was not simply a beautiful animal, he was a victim of systemic failure. His story was a cry for empathy, for intervention, for the power of young people to challenge what adults have accepted. In the book, readers were forced to confront the idea that magical law could be manipulated just like our own. In the movie, that confrontation never fully materialized. In many ways, Buckbeak became a symbol not just of freedom, but of resistance. His rescue, achieved by breaking the rules, was a statement that sometimes justice exists outside the letter of the law. Harry, Hermione, and even Hagrid chose conscience over compliance. It's easy to follow rules, it's much harder to stand against them when they are wrong. Even after his rescue, Buckbeak's life remained precarious. For a time, he lived in hiding with Sirius Black, renamed Witherwings to avoid detection. That he had to change his identity speaks volumes. He could not return to Hogwarts openly. He was still marked by the sentence passed against him. Though he had done nothing wrong, the stain of accusation followed him, as it does for so many creatures and people cast aside by faulty systems. Buckbeak reappears later in the series, still loyal, still proud, but the shadow of his near execution never fully lifts. Readers who followed his journey remember the weight of it. They remember Hagrid, drunk and weeping on the steps of his hut. They remember Hermione frantically flipping through legal books, searching for loopholes. They remember the sickening sound of the axe in the distance, and the breathless silence when it became clear the bird had escaped. The tale of Buckbeak reminds us that the magical world is not immune to the flaws of the real one. Creatures can be condemned because of fear, officials can be manipulated by the powerful, and those who are most vulnerable are often left without a voice unless someone dares to speak for them. As readers, we are asked not just to witness the injustice, but to feel it, to be moved by it, and perhaps in doing so to be changed. It is easy to remember Buckbeak as the creature who helped Sirius escape, but that would be forgetting his story's heart. He was not just a mount, not just a beast. He was an individual caught in a web of fear, law, and influence, a creature who could not defend himself in words and who was nearly killed because others refused to listen. His salvation did not come from the ministry. It came from children who chose to risk everything for what was right. There is no greater magic than empathy, and in the world of Harry Potter, the most powerful acts often come not from spells, but from choices. Buckbeak's story, quietly powerful, stands as one of the series' greatest reminders of this truth. In his silver feathers, in his unbroken gaze, we see not just a magical creature, but the soul of resistance and the cost of silence. Number 25, The Carrows and the Occupation of Hogwarts. Of all the dark chapters in the history of Hogwarts, few rival the haunting transformation of the school in the final year of the Second Wizarding War. As Voldemort seized control of the Ministry of Magic in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Hogwarts ceased to be a sanctuary for learning and became a fortress of fear. Under the guise of order and discipline, the Death Eaters infiltrated its very heart, assigning two of their own to oversee the students, Alecto and Amycus Carrow. These siblings were not only sadistic, but strategically placed. Their mission was simple: corrupt the young, spread fear, and extinguish resistance. The Carrows did not come as mere instructors. They arrived as enforcers of a new regime. Amycus taught what he called defensive magical theory, a twisted version of the traditional defense against the dark arts, but it was, in fact, instruction in the offensive use of dark magic. Students were not taught to defend against the dark arts anymore. They were trained to wield them. Alecto, on the other hand, taught Muggle studies, now reimagined as propaganda to justify blood purity and vilify non-magical people. She preached that Muggles were inferior and that their oppression was not only natural, but necessary. The subjects were no longer academic, but ideological weapons. Hogwarts had turned into something unrecognizable. Prefects could no longer be trusted. Teachers who had not fled, like Professor McGonagall, walked a tightrope between quiet defiance and forced compliance. The ghosts of the castle, silent witnesses to centuries of history, lingered now in shadows heavier than any before. The portraits in the hallways, often chatty and curious, watched with mournful silence as students were marched through corridors with heads bowed. Punishment became a show of power. Amicus Caro's favourite method of discipline was forcing students to use the Cruciatus Curse on their classmates. If they refused, they were tortured themselves. In one instance, Michael Corner, a Ravenclaw student and member of Dumbledore's army, defied Amicus and was brutally punished. As Neville later recalled, they used the Cruciatus Curse on him because he wouldn't hurt someone else. These acts were not mere punishments, they were psychological warfare designed to breed betrayal, fear, and helplessness. Neville Longbottom's transformation during this dark year is one of the most striking arcs in the entire series. Once mocked for his clumsiness and timidity, Neville emerged as a symbol of hope. With Harry gone and the Resistance underground, Neville became the heart of a new generation of fighters. The Room of Requirement became their haven, transformed into a secret refuge for Dumbledore's army, complete with food, beds, and a system of communication that allowed members to remain hidden while plotting their resistance. Neville's resolve was tested constantly. The Carrows singled him out as a troublemaker, targeting him with brutal spells and verbal abuse. But he did not break. The castle itself seemed to aid him. The Room of Requirement would evolve, providing hidden passages and even allowing escape when the risk of capture grew too high. "It's got a mind of its own, the room, sort of likes us," Neville once said. This symbiosis between rebel and space reinforced the magical soul of Hogwarts, a place that, even under occupation, resisted tyranny. The Room of Requirement wasn't just a hiding place, it was the last beacon of freedom within the castle walls. Students like Luna Lovegood, Ginny Weasley, Seamus Finnegan, and Ernie Macmillan took shelter there. They formed the core of the reformed Dumbledore's army. They didn't merely hide, they plotted, they sabotaged, they passed messages. In a world where speaking out meant punishment or death, these teenagers became revolutionaries. In one particularly grim episode, Amicus tried to force a fourth-year Hufflepuff boy to curse another child. When he refused, Amicus dragged him through the halls, using the Cruciatus Curse as an example to the rest. Seamus Finnegan tried to intervene and was restrained. Such public humiliations were designed to break the spirit of Hogwarts, but they had the opposite effect. The underground resistance only grew stronger, tighter, more determined. The line between the world of children and that of soldiers blurred. The innocence that Hogwarts once promised was obliterated. Children like Colin Creevey, who once idolized Harry Potter with wide-eyed enthusiasm, were now running messages through secret tunnels and risking expulsion or worse, just to bring food to the Room of Requirement. Hogwarts was no longer a school. It was a battlefield in slow motion. Snape's role as headmaster further complicated the moral terrain. While officially loyal to Voldemort, his leadership was ambiguous. He rarely intervened directly, allowing the Carrows to carry out their abuses unchecked. But there were moments, glimpses, where Snape's shadow concealed silent rebellion. He never directly harmed students. He protected them in ways that would only become clear in retrospect. Yet, to the students, he was complicit. To Neville, Snape was just another face of oppression. Neville's grandmother, Augusta Longbottom, became a figure of defiance in her own right. When the Carrows attempted to arrest her after Neville's growing notoriety, she fought them off and went into hiding. The Longbottom name, once a quiet footnote in the Order of the Phoenix, was now associated with open rebellion. Neville stood taller, not because he was fearless, but because he could no longer afford to be afraid. The Room of Requirement transformed into more than a shelter. It became a living monument to Dumbledore's ideals. Old banners were found and hung, books that taught real defense magic circulated among the students, and perhaps most poignantly, a mural was drawn on the wall, a large phoenix rising from the ashes, surrounded by the names of friends and fallen allies. The message was clear. Dumbledore's army was not dead. The mental strain of living under the Carrows' rule left scars. Hannah Abbott suffered a breakdown after being forced to watch another student tortured. Justin Finch Fletchley went missing for a week before being found hiding behind a statue near the Great Hall, shaken but alive. Dean Thomas, though not technically a Hogwarts student anymore, attempted to sneak in supplies and messages from the outside world, risking capture every time he ventured near Hogsmeade. One of the most powerful symbols of Hogwarts' resistance was the continuing use of the galleon coins, an enchanted communication system devised by Hermione in Order of the Phoenix. These coins would heat up when a meeting was called, displaying the time and place. During the Carrow era, these coins became lifelines. The names they displayed were no longer just reminders of unity, they were survival signals. When Harry finally returned to Hogwarts in the final pages of the Deathly Hallows, he found not a school, but a war zone in waiting. Neville greeted him with battle plans. Seamus had a stash of Weasley's wildfire whiz-bangs for distractions. Even the Room of Requirement responded with weapons. "You show up here and everything starts exploding," Neville joked grimly. But beneath the humour was truth. The resistance had never died. It had evolved. The events in the book contrast sharply with the simplified version shown in the films. The movie adaptation gave only a passing glance to the daily horrors faced by the students and the magnitude of Neville's heroism. The richness of this resistance, the sleepless nights, the broken friendships, the silent courage, is only found in the pages of the novel. The atmosphere was not merely tense, it was suffocating. When the final battle began, many of the DA members were already armed and ready. The battle wasn't a spontaneous uprising, it was the culmination of months of silent rebellion. The students had rehearsed, trained, healed each other, and whispered spells in the darkness. They were more than children, they were soldiers who had grown up too soon. Neville's moment of triumph, when he draws the sword of Gryffindor and kills Nagini, isn't just a plot point. It is the symbolic fulfillment of everything that year stood for. The boy who had once feared his own shadow now struck the final blow against the darkness. "It takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to our enemies," Dumbledore once said. Neville embodied that in full. Even after the war ended, the trauma lingered. Hogwarts rebuilt its walls, but some parts of its spirit remained wounded. The names of fallen students were etched into a hidden wall behind the Room of Requirement, a sacred place for the survivors. Every year, those who had once been children now returned as adults to lay flowers, speak names, and remember a time when magic alone couldn't save them, but courage could. In telling the full story of what happened at Hogwarts during that final year, we are not merely filling gaps left by the films. We are honoring the students who, in the shadow of darkness, became legends. Their rebellion was quiet, but unshakable. Their magic, though forbidden, was just. Their story, though often overlooked, is one of the most powerful in the wizarding world.